It's a theological world, after all, after all, after all, after all.
Hello and welcome to It's a Theological World After All. Today we're talking about eternal in love, rethinking God in an age of acceleration. In our age of acceleration, where everything moves faster from information to relationships to entire cultures, we often forget to ask, what is time for? And even deeper, what does God have to do with it, if anything at all? Today, we're joined by one of the most insightful voices in contemporary theology, Dr. R.T. Mullins, otherwise known as the Reluctant Theologian. You may have heard of him there, whose work on the nature of God, time, emotion, and love have reshaped how we think about the divine in both the academy and in the church. He's certainly not uncontroversial or non-controversial. Ryan's latest book, Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God, brings these ideas down to earth in a much more readable way. Of course, you can go and read his more academic work, but his latest work is a fresh look at God who is transcendent and personal, eternal, yet truly loving, and who enters into time not as a passive observer, but as a living presence. Together, we're going to ask what happens to us, our theology, our emotions, our pace of life, when we remember that God is not just beyond time, or maybe he's not beyond time at all, but in time, actually with us. This is It's a Theological World After All, and I'm your host, Joshua Farris. Thanks for being with us, and thank you, Ryan, for joining us today.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on.
This should be fun. I have a lot of questions prepared, but we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how far along we get in the conversation, and maybe we can have a further discussion if need be about these important topics.
Mm-hmm.
So these are certainly relevant to your area of study, your research for the last, how many years?
Gosh.
12 to see, 10, 12, 13 years now?
I mean, I don't want to put a number on it because it makes me, it ages me quite a bit.
Old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you still look young, so.
And that's all that matters.
Yeah. Yes. If only age were not a thing.
I know.
We didn't have to age.
Yeah.
But so I want to talk about this problem of speed. So I do want to look a lot at your book, your new book, especially as it's, I've written a review of it, by the way. You can check it out online. And I was really encouraged by the book. I thought it was a great book. And in fact, I thought it was kind of, you might think of it as the new revised replacement of Thomas Morris's little book, great book, which was very influential. His introduction to philosophical theology, Our Idea of God. Is that right? Or
that's the right one. Yeah.
Our Idea of God. Yeah, I thought this Eternal in Love book was great as well. It was more accessibly written, but you cover a lot of material still, and some quite a bit of nuance and dense topics. So I want to get into some of those ideas as well, but I'm going to try to frame them in a particular way that may meet our audience, our listeners. Try to frame them in a slightly more practical way. Not that thinking about the eternality or everlasting nature of God is not practical. It certainly is. But I want to try to bring it down to our listeners a bit more.
Yeah.
So framing our age is one of a kind of temporal anxiety. We experience everything we experience in life existentially, our cultural angst, our some of our dispositions that we've developed as a result of our the cultural climate that we're in, our family upbringing. They're all related to time in some way. We live in an age of instant everything, especially in America. I think more so in America. I mean, I think I could say that as an American, where our culture is very fast paced. Here in the South, we do slow down a bit more than other parts of North America, but we still live a fairly fast paced life. How do you see our sense of time shaping? This is a big question, so we can unpack it with smaller questions, but how do you see our sense of time shaping the way people experience God, or fail to experience God, maybe?
I think our modern experience of time actually prevents us from thinking about God. Because and actually, I think it's deeper than that. I think it prevents us from thinking just full stop and being able to reflect in any sort of rational or morally significant way. Because when you create a culture that's super fast paced, where no one's allowed to stop, where you barely have any time to rest, and there's no real sense of vacation or holidays in the US compared to, say, Europe or something, you don't have time to even take a breath. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're dulling the masses for the sake of taking political power. So I think that our artificially fast-paced society, it prevents us from being able to reflect on anything, let alone God. So I think it's a serious problem.
Good. Yeah. I think I'm reminded of the temptation. We have a daughter. We don't have a large family. We have just one child at the moment, and we're constantly running her around, it seems, to school and to soccer. And there's a temptation, and this is a common temptation, it seems, for many families, as I understand it, even here in the South, to when we need to get something to eat, we rush through McDonald's. And we're seeing a lot more fast food even popping up here in the South. As restaurants go, we're seeing more and more constantly popping up here in this affluent area that we live in, actually, here in Shelby County. And there's always this temptation to just get fast food. And so this has been an area of anxiety for me, of course, for our family, and because certainly I think fast food is really bad for us, and it's bad for my daughter, but it's much easier. So I want to think, let's ask a framing or contextual question. You've written on this a lot, and then we'll come back, we'll zoom out to a more practical application. Many people think of God as being eternal and timeless. In fact, I was just on with Stephen Priest, and he was making the argument that God is necessarily timeless, actually. And you argue otherwise, and you've argued otherwise in a lot of different contexts. God is actually temporal, right? Or he exists in time. Is that right?
Yeah. So,
and why is that?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, let's describe what that means. So to be eternal is just to exist without beginning and without end. And everyone wants to say that about God. God doesn't begin to exist. God's not going to cease to exist. But when you're looking historically in the Western traditions, but also the Eastern traditions, there's been several different associated concepts with that. So there's been this long debate for all of history of, is God also timeless or is God temporal? And so if you want to say either of those claims, you have to make additional statements above and beyond being merely eternal. So if you want to say God is timeless, you'll say God's eternal, so God exists without beginning and without end. But here's the additional claims you need to make. You also need to say that God exists without succession, meaning God does not do one thing and then another and then another. Further, you have to say God does not have any temporal location, and God does not stand in any temporal relationships. Here's what that means. So God does not exist right now, which I know sounds kind of crazy because you might be like, well, surely God exists right now. Well, no, if God's timeless, God does not exist right now. God did not exist in the past. God will not exist in the future. God just exists. And that's the most you can say. You can't say anything more. If God's temporal, things are different. So a temporal God is still eternal, so still existing without beginning and without end. But the claim is that God can undergo succession. So God can do one thing and then another. God does have temporal location and relationships. So, prior to the existence of the universe, there was God. God exists right now, and God will exist in the future. So these are where like these two different views kind of like diverge. Is can God do one thing and then another? Does God exist right now?
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. I know you can say a lot more about that, but that's a very short and succinct definition. I appreciate that. Do you think, coming back to the practical, tying into your first question, do you think this recovering of a temporal God, a tensed, maybe would you call it a tensed God? What's the proper term right now?
I think temporal's a better way to go, because tensed, this starts referring to like certain specific theories on like the language about time, and that's technical, and we don't need to. We can do that if you want, but like we don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need. Okay, we don't need to do that. No, that's fine. So if God is a temporal God, dynamic God, you might say, does this help us at all? Does this help us recover a kind of more humane pace of life? Is there anything we can say about that in terms of our fast-paced life?
Possibly. So when you're looking at Scripture, so 2 Peter, it makes a connection between God's eternality and God's patience, and then it calls us to hope and patience. So what you see in 2 Peter is there's this claim, there's this objection, like Jesus is not coming back. This is the objection. Yeah. Why? Well, look, what do we see right now? We see wars and rumors of wars. We see natural disasters. Well, that's how things have always been. Like it's always been this way. This is not like new stuff. Come on. So Christ is not coming back. Like, stop it. Just stop it. And so that's the objection. And what Peter's response is, you are not patient in the way that God is patient. God is patiently waiting so that all might be saved. And you need to be patient too. And you're like, excuse me, what are you going on here? And this is where Peter says, look, for God, 1,000 years, it's just like a day, like it. And when you think about like eternal, like an eternal being, a being that never began to exist, well, it kind of makes sense. You're like, right, yeah, like 1,000 years, it's not really that long. Whereas that seems like forever for me. I mean, because like I'm just like, my goodness, like 1,000 years, that seems like a long time. So what this tells us, I think, is God is so patient that he is willing to play the long game when it comes to humanity. And so you need to be patient, not just for the sake of being patient, but you need to be patient because God is patient with humanity. So God's playing the long game, and we need to learn to think in those terms as well. And the reason this connects, I think, with temporality is because a timeless being cannot be patient. There's no literal or metaphorical sense in which a timeless being is patient, or long-suffering, or waiting. These are all literally and metaphorically false of a timeless being. So a temporal being is literally patient, is literally waiting. So I think this makes much better sense of what we see in 2 Peter.
Good. Okay. Yeah, that's really that's really thoughtful. I can already hear the classical theists raising their fists and jumping up in arms. Yes. Well, we'll see. Maybe they can say something in response. But it does make sense. If God is a outside of time, atemporal, then how could he literally experience time and exhibit the characteristics of patience that we need to characterize ourselves as human beings, or at least as mature Christians? I mean, yeah. We don't have to go down this road, but I mean, You might say, like, well, maybe we could take a more Christological line, and Christ is that way, right? But I know you have an objection to that. Yes.
Mhm. Right. Well, yeah, I
Yes.
think the incarnation is impossible if God is timeless, because God was not always incarnate and then became incarnate. So the incarnation itself is just a further demonstration that God is temporal, because it's a God who does one thing and then another.
Yes. No, yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I think maybe our spiritual exhaustion then isn't just about bad scheduling or even bad habits. So maybe it does have to do something to do with our bad theology.
Mm-hmm.
So if we imagine a kind of static, atemporal God, then live as if everything depends on our own motion, well, that might be problematic, right?
It might be. I think when we're talking about like spiritual practice, when our idea of God kind of sets the trajectory for the sort of spiritual practices we engage in. So if you think God is like timeless and unchanging and maybe even impassible, then that's like the ideal we're aiming for. Like we are trying to become the sort of beings that will escape like the clutches of time. I don't know what that could possibly mean, because that would take place after what I'm doing right now. So that would still be time. But it may, like if I stop changing after this, well, okay, I don't really know what that would mean, because that would be after this. But if you've got this sort of static view of God, this God who is impassible, which impassibility means God cannot be moved or influenced by anything outside of himself, or his beliefs or his emotions or his actions. If that's the ideal we're aiming for, then we have to somehow get in a state of mind where we are also not influenced by anything outside of us. I don't think that's a good thing. I mean, think about like your relationship with your daughter. Like you're just not, you're not moved by her in any way, shape, or form. Like that. It doesn't sound like a loving parent. It sounds like you're a terrible parent, in fact.
Right. Yes. An indifferent, cold, distant, temporally, non-temporally related to her. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, intuitively, that it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. We could explore that further. Yeah, I would love to. Let's move into that a little bit more. Let's dive into divine temporality as you spell it out in some of the key ideas in your book, Eternal in Love, and clarify what it means for God to act in time and why that matters. Which it does matter, right? It seems to matter, right? And you suggest some lines or reasons why it does matter in your book. So in Eternal Love, I think you say that God's eternity isn't timeless detachment, as you just described, but faithful presence across all time. How does that reframe divine perfection? What do you mean by yeah.
So everyone in these debates thinks that God is perfect. Like, unless you catch them on a bad day, right? Like if you're in a bad mood, you might say like, God's just, this or that. But in more like sober moments, everybody thinks God's perfect. The problem is we have disagreements about what we think perfection entails. Like, what does it mean to be perfect? And so there's this one assumption going back to Plato that part of what it means to be perfect is to be unchanging. And the assumption goes something like this. All change is for the better or the worse. So if God changes, well, if he got better, well, then he wasn't perfect to begin with. Like that's bad. And if he got worse, well, then you're not that perfect if you can get worse. So like, there we go. God can't change. And this is such a huge assumption. And a lot of Christian thought that like people don't even bother to like articulate the argument. They just go, all change is better for the worse, therefore immutability. And like, you don't even get like the steps of the argument that I laid out, which I think is lazy, but whatever. A lot of theologians are lazy, and that's fine. Well, it's not fine, but we have to deal with that.
Yeah.
I think it's just wildly false that all changes are for the better or worse. Because I can come up with lots of scenarios that are like super boring, where like the changes, it's just like things are just different. They're not better or worse. And also, I think some changes are entailed by perfection. And so let me give you a couple examples of this. So I think God's knowledge and God's power entail certain kinds of changes. If you are knowing, all knowing, then your knowledge needs to track all of the facts of reality. And so if all of the facts of reality, if they're changing, well, then your knowledge better update to what's going on. And we are living in an ever-changing world. Like the sum total facts of reality are changing from each moment to moment. And if God's knowledge is not tracking that, then God's not a perfect knower. So that's
Right.
quite bad. Power, the exercise of power. If you are freely exercising your power, that just means not doing something and then doing something for a reason. So there's some kind of transition from not using your power to using your power. So God wasn't always creating a universe. But then 13.5 billion years ago, the universe popped into existence. Why? Because God started using his power. God wasn't always in a covenantal relationship with anyone. And then at some point, he was like, hey, Moses, come over here. Well, let's do some cool stuff. And so these are changes because God is now exercising his powers in new ways. So I think the free exercise of omnipotence also just logically entails temporality and change.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that well, that certainly seems to fit a natural, intuitive read of the biblical narratives and the covenantal stories, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it probably it makes some sense out of the incarnation and God's covenantal faithfulness in terms of the biblical storyline, right? You might say I guess you would say it makes better sense than God's atemporality.
Mhm.
We can even make coherent sense out of God's atemporality,
I
right?
I think I've not encountered a single person who has been able to consistently talk of God in terms of timelessness. And the main reason is when you're trying to not even just tell the Christian story of the world, but tell like any sort of theistic story of the world, it is impossible to speak of God timelessly in a very consistent manner because people's pens, they always slip and start talking about God being before the universe, God doing stuff right now, and God having, and then doing this, and then doing that. So I've never seen anybody consistently describe a timeless being somehow creating a universe and interacting with it.
Yeah.
So I think it's, yeah. So I think the reason it's so difficult to consistently describe it is because it's so counterintuitive, and you end up introducing all sorts of continuity errors in your story of the world.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's pretty compelling. Yeah. So if a Thomist were here,
Mhm.
I know we love the Thomists. Thomists were here, and the Thomists were saying, might offer something like this. Well, we can think of God, at least analogously, moving through time, interacting with in terms of the covenants and interacting with his people. But really and truly in his being, he is, you might say, frozen in eternal stillness. Or maybe they wouldn't even want to put it quite like that. They would want to say that he's in a kind of completed, peaceful state already, with all the perfections and goods, as if he's this massively virtuous human being that's already gone through these experiences and acquired these virtues. He already has it. And so in relation to us, we get to experience those good things in time. And why wouldn't that be just as good or even better than responsive, kind of literally relational God who is timeless?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well, that's predicated on timeless. Yeah.
Yeah. So the notion that God analogously experiences time is unintelligible nonsense. I mean, like, I don't know what it could possibly mean, but I've seen the claim a lot, and usually it's just like mystery mongering is all it ends up being. So if you analogously have some kind of property, there's still supposed to be some kind of overlap with like the way the property is in us. And I don't know how you could analogously experience one thing and another when you're not actually experiencing one thing and then another. And so the way Aquinas talks about these sort of things, though, he would say the idea of God experiencing one thing and another cannot possibly be an analogy, because instead it has to be a metaphorical statement. Because analogical predications are literal predications for Aquinas. For the Thomists, that's different, because the story of Thomism in the 20th century, the Catholic Church wasn't always allowed to do critical, higher like textual criticism. So in the 20th century, they discovered they had a view of Aquinas that wasn't really Aquinas. That's another story. So what the Thomists might say, well, they might say lots of things, but what Aquinas
You're
says... You're
saying they're not being true to Thomas?
There's
Thomas
like
Aquinas?
30, 40 different, like versions of Thomism, and then there's Aquinas.
Yes.
So yes, I'm saying this. And I've had some like dialogues with Thomas where they're just like, yeah, I don't have to be consistent with Aquinas, or it's just kind of vaguely inspired. But I'm like, okay, it's fine. I guess I don't have to believe a lot of what Jesus says. I'm just vaguely inspired by Jesus. That's being too snarky.
Yeah.
But no, you'd have to metaphorically, like say God's metaphorically experiencing time. But I don't know what that metaphor points towards, because the literal reality is God's not doing one thing and then another. And God's not literally responding to us. Paul Helm actually is really upfront about this in his work on, is God really responsive or not? And he's like, God presents himself to us as if he were responsive when he's not actually responsive. Why does God do this? And Paul Helm says, well, God has to accommodate his language so that we would draw closer to God. You see this in Anselm, you see this in Calvin, you see it in a lot of different people. God presents himself to us not as he actually is, but as we want to see him. This is Calvin in the Institutes. He says this. That's a remarkable claim when you think about it. So God's not actually responding to you at all, but he tells you he's responding to you, so that way you'll draw closer to him. Like, what kind of person is that? Like I mean, again, imagine like relationships with your children, where you're like, oh, of course, honey, I'm responding to you. Responding to you at all? I'm really responding to you, though. I mean, it sounds like a
bit deceptive. Maybe?
It's a bit deceptive. It feels untrustworthy, and at times like
unreal.
It's just unreal. Yes, which is a Thomistic doctrine that God's not really related to the universe. There's a technical point being made there, though. But yeah, it's a weird view at the very least.
Yeah. No, that's good. So the snarky response from a Thomist might be, and I've seen this before, right? So your God is more like Morgan Freeman on Bruce Almighty.
Yeah.
Well, this is taking us back. There's probably a newer example. That's pretty old, isn't it?
At this point, it would be a bit old, yeah. But the basic point is like you're making God a creature of some sort. You're making him too human. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I always find this really odd. And I've asked some different people like at conferences this question. I'm like, what kind of human do you know is a tri-personal being that's necessarily exists and is eternal and omnipotent and omniscient and so on? Did any of you know like a human that fits that like description? And usually people are like they're kind of quiet and kind of grumble, and I'm like, well, right, because this is a silly objection. Like it. So Francis McConnell, about 100 years ago, he was a theologian in Ohio. It ended up in Indiana. He was at what was that Lutheran school there? Not Valparaiso, but DePaul. He ended up at DePaul University.
Oh yeah. Good.
So he has this line where he says, he's like, there's nothing you can say to satisfy the complaint if someone raises this objection, like you're making God too anthropomorphic. He's like, there's nothing you could say to satisfy this, because they're already anthropomorphizing God in their own way, and they're going to refuse to see that. So there's nothing you could do. It's just, you just have to move on with people who are going to be rational dialogue partners.
That's a good point. No, fair. Okay, that's interesting. So you could say, rather than your view being the unmoved mover, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a
it's Aristotle.
Yes, a concept from Aristotle that Thomas certainly makes much of, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly in one of his arguments for the existence of God, he makes much of the unmoved mover. which, based upon what you've said already, and it sounds very plausible, that's pretty incoherent. Even that idea may be incoherent.
It's not even clear if Aristotle actually thinks this. Like, there's some different Aristotelian scholars. I've seen them debate this question of if God really is, Aristotle's understanding of God actually is like purely timeless. Based on some of the language he uses, it might actually be more accurate that God is just like thoroughly temporal. But it's still the case that like Aristotle wants to say God's not moved because God's not even aware of your existence. Because God, for Aristotle, only knows necessary truths, so he doesn't know you exist, that's kind of wild. But there's it might be incoherent, but we'd have to say a bit more before we could point out where the incoherence is.
Sure, good. Well, your view is something more like a living metaphysics of love, or maybe the ever-moving lover, right?
Yeah,
or maybe something like that.
Maybe, yeah, because like Clark Pinnock has this book called The Most Moved Mover, because he wants to like emphasize like God's like really like in this back and forth, and I'm like,
right,
yeah,
it's a catchy title, yeah.
It is. It's a good title. It's good marketing. It
was good.
Yeah, it was great. Still a lot of people hated it, but that was that was controversial then. The reason I'm hesitant to go quite that far is because I think we have to look at the rationality of God and God's plans for creation, because there might be a lot of stuff in the universe that God has certain emotions about, but he's not like he's always just kind of going like, oh gosh, like always like fretting about, because I think God's perfectly rational, and before he creates a universe, he comes up with a plan for how to bring things about in the way that he wants to satisfy whatever his goal is for creation. So I think God's moved by creation, but it's not like this constant like, oh gosh, what am I doing? Like, running around by the seat of his pants kind of view of God.
Right. You have other ways of articulating certainly his knowledge, his providential control. He's not like, it's not like he's caught off guard, like some of the at least stereotypical. It's true of some open theists, the way they articulate God. They would admit, they would agree to that, but at least the stereotypical views of certain open theistic views, God is not this sort of being that's always this person that's always caught off guard. Yeah, right. But love does function in an important way, I think, in your book, Eternal in Love, your concept of God that you're developing. Would you say, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. So I wrote an earlier book called God in Emotion, and this debate comes up that's centered around love. Is God impassible, or is he passible? Can God be influenced by you, or is he not influenced by you? And there's all these love arguments. And one of the things I found so deeply frustrating was no one would really tell me what love is. Like, they would just say like, oh, God's got these desires. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I've got a lot of desires too. Like, I have a desire for McDonald's afterwards or something, like, but tell me what love is. Like, what are we doing here? And then like our friend Jordan Wesling wrote a book on divine love, where he lays out this account that I thought was really attractive. And so this view of love says, when you love a person, you value their existence, because if you don't really value their existence, you're really not that into them. You value their flourishing, and you value some kind of relationship with this other person. And when I look at it in those terms, I think this really helps me understand, first off, what love is. And then second, it helps me reorient a lot of my thinking about God. So I think God's perfectly rational. And so God's always appropriately responsive to objectively good reasons. And if you have value, or at least like the idea of you existing, like that would, if you existed, you'd have value. That could be a reason for God to create you. And your value is now a reason also for God to want to promote your flourishing, and a reason for God to want to enter into a relationship with you. So now we can start understanding God's actions as rational actions, because when you love someone, it is actually rational. Sometimes you do crazy things, like in our human experiences, but God's love is going to be perfectly rational. It's going to be appropriately responsive to the values of his creation. And this is a very interesting way of looking at God, but I think it's also a very biblical way of looking at God, of seeing why is God doing this or that in Scripture? Well, because he's like, well, these are things that I love. This is why I'm upset about this or that. This is why I'm happy when sinners repent. This is why I am sad when tragedy befalls my creatures, because God says these things have value. They are good.
Mm. Good. Yeah. So, bringing this notion of love and divine emotion, which are important to your work. Yeah. Your academic work as well. It comes out in this more recent treatment. Let's make it a little more practical.
Mhm.
I think there's much that could be said here. Many people feel emotionally disconnected today, even when they're connected online, or maybe especially when they're connected online.
Mhm.
What do you think divine emotion has to say to that?
There's a lot of like emotional numbness, a lot of emotional exhaustion, a lot of disconnection that we see, and it's hard to break through that. And when I started working on a lot of these different topics, the kind of responses were really interesting. So when I did all my stuff on God and time, there's some atheists, there's some agnostics that are interested in the topic, but like your average person, they just kind of go, I don't know, I'm just this kind of glaze over it, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started doing the God and emotion stuff, people had like very strong opinions like right away. I had like a lot of atheist and agnostic friends who were like, you've got to do a book on this because like this is so important. I'm like, why do you care? And I've done a stand-up comedy show based around like two different views on God's emotions. I've done this in Scotland. It went really well. Done it a bunch of places in the US and it went very well, except in Florida. It pissed off a couple people, but like the guy who founded Babylon Bee, like him and his wife were in the front row, and they thought they were laughing the entire time. So
Excellent.
Yeah. So maybe it was worth it, So like a couple people didn't like it, but Babylon Bee guy and his wife, they were like, this is hilarious. This is great. And I'm like, there we go. Doing something right. So here's what this says to me. Something about, it's not just thinking about God and emotion, but it's something about the way I'm presenting it that seems to break through to people. And I think it's a mixture of a few different things. So I'm very sarcastic. I'm very snarky. I've got a certain kind of sacrilegious irreverence to me. And I think that these are spiritual gifts that help break through really numb and exhausted minds. Because sometimes you need something to just wake you up from your intellectual and emotional slumber. So sometimes you just need someone to be like, it's got a psychopath. I don't know, let's talk about it. You need something like that to just shake people and make them go, oh, right, this stuff really does matter. And every time I presented the show, every time I've present for different public audiences on this, people get very animated and they really start thinking about God. Which I mean, you spent a bit of time in the UK, so church attendance. Like, I mean, it exists, but like not a lot.
Or does it? Yeah. That's the question.
It is. Yeah. But I had a sold out show in Scotland during the Edinburgh International Fringe Festival. And I don't think, there was two people in the audience that you and I know, so I knew they were Christian, but everybody else in the audience, they're all over the place. They're not Christians. But they were talking about that show for years. Because I would bump into people at a pub and they'd be like, oh, you did that I'm still thinking about that. And I'm like, so a bunch of people who've never shown any interest in God, now all of a sudden, because of a very kind of sarcastic, funny way of just looking at the question, now they're actually entertaining the idea of God in a very long-lasting way. And I think that's very profound because I don't know how often any of us as theologians ever get to say we got through to somebody like that.
Yeah, that's true. Theologians have kind of become pretty disconnected, maybe pretty irrelevant. So this is good. When was the last time you gave that show?
The last time I did the show, that would have been, I guess that was October of 2023. Because when I presented at that conference in October of 2024, I just did like just a normal like talk, but the room was packed because everyone was expecting like there's gonna be some kind of crazy show here, and so I just had to start out going. As you can see, I'm wearing just a suit and I'm just gonna do a normal boring talk. I'm sorry, and everybody just starts laughing, but they're kind of like, oh man, I really wish there was something more. And I was
yeah.
Sorry, bro.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. You've argued that along those lines, with respect to emotion, you've argued that love, compassion, anger, these things that would otherwise be considered, might be considered, or certainly are considered by some within what's broadly known as the classical theistic camp or the Thomistic camp, as imperfections in God. But you've argued rather to the contrary, that they could be expressions of his moral life, a perfect moral life even. So what does that mean? How does that change our view of emotional life more generally?
Yeah. So in emotion, let's define an emotion, then we can get into this. So an emotion is a felt evaluation of a situation. So you see something in your circumstance and you judge it to be a particular way. Like it's sad, it's happy, it's, scary, because, Halloween's coming up. So lots of things are scary. And there's something that it's like to make that evaluation. There's something that it feels like to have that evaluation of this is scary, or this is exciting, or this is, and on and on and on. Yeah. And so your emotions, what a lot of philosophers of emotion, a lot of psychologists point out is your emotions can be rational or irrational. And they can be grounded on things that are true, or they can be grounded on things that are false. So your emotions can be subject to being corrected. Because if you see something in your situation, you might be like, oh man, this is really scary. And then afterwards you realize like, oh no, that was just the wind just kind of blowing a tree against my window slightly. I don't need to freak out as much as I was. So you kind of correct your emotion. If you see something that you think is like really tragic and it turns out like someone's playing a practical joke on you, you're like, oh, right. Okay. Actually, this is kind of funny. So why? Because you're now evaluating the situation in a different way. You're seeing it for what it really is. And so we're constantly adjusting our emotions to try to make them fit the situation as best as we can. And so what you see in the classical theistic tradition, but also in like people who reject it, they all want to say God's emotions, whatever his emotional evaluations are, they have to be perfectly rational. And they have to be moral, like morally appropriate too. Because no one wants like God having like immoral emotions. Like that's weird. No one likes that.
Right.
But when it comes to these kind of debates, I think that there are certain value judgments that are being made. So because when you're evaluating things, you're making value judgments. And the classical theistic claim is that God is not moved by anything, influenced by anything outside of himself for his beliefs, his emotions, and his actions. Why? Well, because it would be irrational. It would be immoral for God to make you or anything else in the created order somehow a proper object of his beliefs or his emotions or his actions. So it would be really immoral or really irrational if God acted on behalf of you and because of you. And I'm like, excuse me? Like that seems weird to me. Whereas I want to say, no. The most perfectly rational thing to do is if you create something, it's probably because you thought it had some kind of value. And that's why you were moved to create it. And you responding to it in various ways that demonstrates how much value you place on it. You love your children, and that love, well, that grounds a whole range of emotions. You're upset, you're angry when bad things happen to your children. Why? Because you value them. You're happy and excited when good things happen to your children. Why? Well, because you value them and you want them to like flourish and have good things. I think this makes much better sense of just a rational being, a rational God, but also of what we see in Scripture.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's persuasive. It makes sense. So when I think about compassion, anger, certainly in our context, that makes sense. And okay, so analogously, you think about like God, sometimes there's answers to God in relation to the problem of evil. Some will put forward or kind of foreground the reality that God is timeless. So some think that kind of maybe gets him out of the problem of evil to some extent. But there's a kind of deeper issue here that you're getting after when conceiving of God as being not emotional, and conceiving of his perfection as in a, well, I was about to say disembodied way, but he is disembodied
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah.
But in a non-emotional way, there is something fundamentally that seems off about that. So this is why you call him, is God a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
In your famous show.
Yeah.
Psychopath. I always get sociopath and psychopath mixed up. They're similar, but psychopath is worse than a sociopath, if I recall correctly. Right? There's an emotional disconnect all around, in terms of something emotionally is just shut off in a psychopath in terms of natural responses to emotional responses to harm or pain in the world. And this is why psychopaths can do potentially horrendous things. It doesn't mean, I don't think it means they always do it if I remember correctly, but it means that there's a mechanism that's completely off in them such that they could do something pretty horrendous and not feel bad about it at all.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's this deficit of empathy. So empathy has like a couple different components. There's a cognitive component. So like, I know that you have this emotion, but it also has this affective component, which is I know what it's like for Josh to feel this way. And so that's where the psychopaths have a deficit is like, they're really good at knowing you have this particular emotion, and that's what makes them quite dangerous, is because they know how to get you to have certain emotions and whatnot, but they don't feel it with you. But there's different kinds. Like there's successful psychopaths, there's unsuccessful psychopaths. Successful ones are the ones who kind of figure out how to sort of integrate into reality. The unsuccessful ones, those are the ones that are the dangerous ones because they just don't really care about trying to fit in with societal norms, and they just don't feel it. So yeah. And so that, so I think when you look at the classical theist saying God's literally has no empathy at all, only metaphorically, not analogously, but metaphorically has empathy and compassion, then I'm like, well, you gave God the emotional profile of a psychopath. That's weird. Like that's probably not the best thing to do. So that's like kind of like the way like some of the arguments I've run go. Yeah. So this is like, I think it's a weird thing. And if you're thinking in terms of like your practical spiritual life, you have these different kind of moments where I'll start with like, you're like who you decide to get married to. If you have this experience of realizing this person is not who I thought they were, like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of pain that goes along with that. Yeah. And the same thing can happen too with your relationship with God, where if you realize God's nothing like what you thought, you can have this moment of going, what does that say about me? That this was the God I chose to worship. And so this can be a source of pain. And so part of one of the motivations for this little book about a big God, this Eternal in Love book, was to help people go, look, we are constantly having to update our beliefs about other people around us. And this process of getting to know someone, it's a long process. It's a difficult process. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's fun. But there's a whole gamut here. And we do have to deal with hard questions like, what do I actually think about God? And what does that say about me? That this is the kind of being I think is worthy of worship. It's hard stuff, but it's important stuff.
Yes. No, that's good. That's good. We could certainly move on from this really quickly, but I want to press into this a little bit more because I think there is a deep problem here. And so I want to maybe try to trail this out a little bit longer, this thread. So, yeah, I mean, I find this very intuitively plausible. I mean, I think there's a term that I used years ago. It was in the literature. I know this because I'm familiar to some extent with the literature, not as much as you. But I used to call it theistic personalism. I like the term personalism. This And this will move us into
Mhm.
the next section about personhood and the fact that God is person or personal. It fits with a kind of paradigm that I've always found right, that tracks with in important ways, in complicated ways, how it is that we think of us and our relationships interpersonally. Um, thinking of Alvin Flanagan, J.P. Moreland,
Mhm.
they have some arguments regarding the argument from consciousness for the existence of God.
Yeah.
And I've for years found, Moreland. I think he published the first like book length treatment of that argument, but there's been lots of arguments along those lines. And,
Yeah.
he's working from a kind of paradigmatic conception of personhood that he sees as somehow latent within us, or Alvin Flanagan would articulate it as when our our cognitive faculties are functioning properly or whatever, we just have this excuse me, this intuitive or natural paradigm that that arises about the nature of persons themselves, right? And so Flanagan's made much of this in a couple of important articles, I think, on against materialism and for some sort of dualism, that we are minds or souls or something like that. And we have that paradigm because, well, there's something in our nature and in nature itself that just naturally gives rise to that. There's something deeply metaphysically real about it. It's almost like it's metaphysically imprinted on us in a way that we just we know this to be the case, right? We know this to be true. And when I think about that, I extend that out into my situation. Or when I think about that in my situation, there's just a natural overlap with, if something happens to my daughter, right? Somebody's like harming her, like an adult is harming her some way. Right. I would say as a person, interpersonally, there would be, I don't think this would detract from some kind of virtue or complete response or perfect response, depending on how we're defining perfect, but anger toward that person, and that anger moving me to do something.
Right.
There's something about that seems metaphysically like, I don't know, rooted in this paradigm of persons, and God must be like this. Even if when it comes to the problem of evil, we can come up with maybe complicated answers as to why God allows it to happen, or permits bad things to happen, or bad things to happen to kids and the like. Surely he must experience some kind of displeasure in it, anger, right?
Yeah.
To think otherwise would be to go against this kind of fundamental paradigmatic concept, right?
Yes.
I mean, it must. Can we just turn off and turn on when we start talking about God and everything else in reality? It's almost like when people start talking about God in this context, especially sometimes when they're talking in the broad kind of set of issues within the problem of evil, they kind of just, they might say, yeah, well, of course, as human, we should respond that way. And but when we talk about God, we just kind of turn off all of a sudden. Like it's almost like we're operating, as it were, as a psychopath in that kind of
in some of these moments. It feels like we've got a certain line of reasoning that we're using, and then all of a sudden, when it comes to God, we just throw it out the window, and we don't always specify why that's the case. So my boss at Lucerne, Giovanni Ventimiglia, he often says theologians are treating God like God is the moon. Because it's like on Earth, this is how gravity works, but on the moon, it's all different. On here, this is how things work, but on God, it's all different. And they're like, we don't need to say anything more. And he's like, that's not how science works. You have to say more. In theology, we have to say more. And so what you see in some of these responses. So when you're going back to your point about theistic personalism. So Brian Davies has this distinction he makes between classical theism and theistic personalism. And theistic personalism is this view, according to him, that people see God as a person, whereas classical theism rejects this. It's historically and demonstrably false that classical theism rejects this, and a lot of classical theists themselves have gone, "What are you talking about?" Like Augustine says right here, God is a person. Aquinas says it. Boethius says it. You just go on and on and on. But here's what Davis was trying to get from this: God's not a person. God's not a moral agent. So when it comes to the problem of evil, man, God has no it doesn't have anything to do with it. Like, he's not a part of the moral community. So horrible things happen. So what?
No.
That is an answer to the problem of evil, but I don't like it because I think it's obvious to me that God's a person. You can't be omniscient and have free will without that's just a person is a conscious thing with free will. So I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think it really satisfies any of our religious intuitions. So Marilyn McCord Adams, she had, for her, when she would talk about the problem of evil, she said the biggest question for her is, does God care about me? And I saw her say this a few times, and when I was going through a dark night of the soul and I was reading her work, that really spoke to me. And so this question, does God care about me? And can God care about me? And if you have this God that's so utterly detached that he's not a moral agent, he's not part of this moral community, then God does not care about you. Right. And I'm like, ooh, okay. Well, then why should I care about God then? I think that's the right response. It's like, this guy doesn't care about me. Why should I care about him?
Right.
Whereas on my view of God, this is a being who could possibly care about you, because he is a being who is responsive to values. And when it comes to the problem of evil, I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think one of the things we have to consider is God's whole network of obligations, because I do think God has obligations. And so I go into this a bit in the little book about a big God to try to explain, whatever God's obligations are, he's got obligations to maintain the entire universe. And obligations to not intervene too much, because if he intervenes too much, it'll undermine our freedom. And one of the reasons God gave us freedom is, one, because it's pretty cool. It's very valuable. But two, so that we could freely enter into a friendship with God. So God has certain obligations about the way he interacts with the world that prevent him from undermining our freedom and from undermining the entire process of being able to enter into a free and loving relationship with him. So my view of God does reorient the way you should think about God, the way you should approach the problem of evil, the way you should approach your own spiritual practice, your own prayer life. Is this a being who could care about me? I think so, yes. Now you have to ask, am I actually seeing that care and concern in my life? And that's a more deeper spiritual question you have to ask yourself. But this is kind of where I see things in my book.
That's good. Yeah, that would be a good diagnostic question for spiritual life. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So, okay, good. Let's move. That was great. If God feels with us, feelings then or emotions. I know there's a distinction, but for our purposes,
they don't matter for our purposes.
Emotions are not distractions or obstacles to morality, to perfection, to using more biblical terminology, holiness. They're not actually obstacles themselves, but rather in this paradigm of persons and things, it's actually an invitation to become more moral or, using kind of classical virtue language, love rightly ordered.
Exactly.
In some way.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I think this is something that a lot of people working on philosophy of emotions they point out like there's this kind of like bizarre like dark ages a bit after Immanuel Kant, and leading into like, you know, kind of the modern era, and then was reclaimed in the late 20th century. And so the dark ages is where people just saw emotions as completely irrational. Whereas all these prior traditions thought, no, emotions are very rational. And there's a deep connection between your emotions and your moral life. So Anastasia Scrutton, she points this out in her book, Thinking Through Feeling, where she says, you need to have emotions as part of the cognitive equipment that helps you like discern and see values. Because when you have an emotion, again, it's a felt evaluation of a situation. You are evaluating things. You are tracking values in the world. So emotions, having emotions is deeply important because that's what helps you see values in the world. And your emotional expressions, they demonstrate how you're evaluating things. So when you see like Augustine talk about, you've got your desires are all like just completely out of order, you know, like these things that like only give you like a little bit of happiness, but they're fleeting. What you should do is you should temper your emotions to appropriately evaluate those things. It's like, yeah, these things are cool. Getting that Wendy's afterwards, you know, like that's good stuff. But like it's fleeting. So like take it for what it's worth. Mm-hmm. Whereas the relationships you're cultivating with your loved ones and with God, you need to have a higher priority on that. And your emotional life should reflect that. Why? Because your emotions should be tracking things that are more valuable. Mm-hmm. So the spiritual life is very much an emotional life. You can't escape having an emotional life, but like, are you going to suck at it or not? Like, that's the spiritual question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Are you going to suck at it or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Mm-hmm. No, that helps. Yeah. People get that. Yeah. So God is personal because he's a person or three persons. And that's not just a metaphor. Certainly. Yeah. Good. Okay. Good. Mm-hmm. So let's bring this to try to bring this to a practical on a more practical level. In our age of artificial intelligence and arguably depersonalization, there's a lot of talks about this, a lot of talks right now about this in terms of to the extent that AI can at least represent some kind of personality. It's certainly, in some ways, it's certainly mimicking it and representing. But there is this interesting question about bringing the concept, the paradigmatic concept that we've been talking about, with this notion of presence. Bringing that together. How might divine personhood restore our sense of meaning and relation?
Like in the age of AI?
Yeah, in the age of AI and depersonalization.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at, there's a couple different themes that I'm seeing in AI, and I'm going to go through them in a second, but what they all say to me is there is this fundamental need in humanity, this deep desire to see the world as ultimately personal in some like really deep sense, in a way that I don't think we can always even like fully recognize or articulate. But all these themes I'm about to mention, I think they just keep coming back to this. So here's what I'm thinking. So a couple of years ago, Elon Musk he announced the start of XAI, you know, like his own like AI company. And I remember listening to the live like the X Live event that he did, and he kept going on about how like this is going to help us be like maximally rational, and like it's going to help us maximize our search for the deep truths of reality. And I was just kind of blown away by those statements, because what it was doing is just predicating these like godlike abilities to AI. That is going to be this sort of thing that can that's going to know everything and help us make these really wildly accurate predictions about the future. And so what that says to me is people are looking for a personal thing that is trustworthy, because we don't feel that right now. So let me stick on this a little bit here. So India right now, the most downloaded app in India is an AI bot that's built on the Bhagavad Gita and some other sacred texts.
Wow.
And so a lot of people are reporting that they find it easier to speak to this religious bot instead of their own priest. And one of the most common reasons I noticed in some of the articles I was looking at is that they don't have to worry about being judged, and they don't have to be worried about being corrected in their beliefs. I'm going to come back to this because that one I think was wild. Another theme I saw is a lot of all these companies are trying to figure out how do I get rid of humans and have just AI do it all for me. Why? Well, because AI is going to be more reliable and more productive, and so that tells you where these CEOs are placing their trust. Now, they've laid off a lot of people. A lot of people lost their jobs. But MIT, there's a report published out of MIT last week that said 95% of attempts to incorporate AI into businesses have been failures up to this point. I mean, that's a huge failure rate. I mean, it's only a 5%.
That's a lot.
It's like I was blown away by this. Like, it's just not producing the revenue that they thought it would. And so a lot of these companies have been forced to start hiring people back. And then, I don't know if you've seen this in the news like these last couple of weeks, all the major AI companies are about to launch AI porn, like their own like versions of this. So I think this tells you a couple of things.
Companies are AI porn.
Correct. Yeah. Like ChatGPT, for instance, they're just like, yeah, we're working on the regulations to make sure like, it's only for adults and stuff. And I'm like, okay. So what that tells you is, one, the business success of this has not been great. And two, they know where the money is. And and then this thing about like porn, this really leads me to like this next theme, the final theme I've noticed. So there's a lot of reports about AI therapy and then AI like girlfriends and all this like kind of like pornographic material. And a lot of people are reporting they find it easier to chat with these AI bots because they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be challenged, and they're not going to be rejected.
Yes.
And that's just what I saw with like all these other previous themes, like with the religion bot and everything. And so what's dangerous about this, though, of course, is that these AI bots, they're programmed to say things that the user is going to find agreeable. So it's not an authentic personal interaction. But all of these things, what they're saying to me is that people are looking for some kind of personal being with these like godlike abilities that's going to take care of you. It's going to like care about your flourishing, your well-being. It's going to like be able to like guide you reliably and trustworthily into the future. That's what I'm seeing with this stuff.
That's good.
And I think that speaks deeply to something that's fundamental to our nature.
Yes. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that does. It speaks to something in our nature about personhood, the nature of personal relations, as well as the need for some kind of personal God, even the need for personal God. Yeah, that fits well within what you're describing, the kind of drive towards some sort of techno-humanism, techno-futurism that is seems to be on the rise. But there's lots of problems with that. Lots of concerns with that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, that's huge. Actually, we could explore that a lot. This actually has a lot of overlap with theological anthropology, something that I'm interested in.
You've written a few things on that,
Yeah. What it means to be human, and especially in this context, there's something relevant about what you've been teasing out here in terms of a paradigm conception of personhood, how that relates to emotion, intersubjectivity, interpersonal relationships, the need we have for that, this sort of deep need that we can't get away from.
Yeah.
Even though we try to somehow duplicate it or manufacture it through AI, which we're trying right now. And I'm sure we're going to see an uptick of that. And we're going to probably see an uptick of uh, disorders as well.
Yeah.
We'll probably come up with some new disorders as a result of
Yeah,
this.
we'll get a fresh new kind of hell that'll come from this. It's as always goes, but yeah.
Yeah. There's this other issue, like oftentimes in a lot of preaching that I grew up with,
Mhm.
teaching, and later on when I started reading more, maybe slightly more sophisticated works in biblical theology, there's this real push and emphasis to know God, right? Or growing in our knowledge of God, knowing more about God. That's important. That's important to theology, of course. And how do we know about God? There's a lot written on that in biblical theology now. But there's this other side of it that, and it certainly touches quite intimately on theological anthropology. And Rosner was his name. He's a biblical theologian in Melbourne at a seminary. Anyway, he wrote a work in the New Studies in Biblical Theology called "Known by God."
Mhm.
Known by God. And I think this tracks quite closely with this idea you're picking up on, where this God that we know is personal, he's temporal, he's deeply relational because he's temporal and real being. What's the difference, as you see it, between knowing about God and being known by God?
Mm-hmm. So one of the distinctions I make in the little book about a big God is between knowing someone well and being in a close personal relationship with them. And I think it kind of tracks this sort of distinction that you see of, like, I want to be known by God as well. So if you know someone well, that means like you know a lot about like kind of what makes them tick. You know a lot of facts about them. You know something about their character. You know something about their desires and whatnot. But like if you're like an FBI agent and you're trying to track down a criminal, you're gonna profile a criminal. You're gonna create like an emotional profile for them. Like, you know something about their characteristics, their motives, like the things they're into, so that way you can track them. You're not gonna be in a close personal relationship with that criminal that you're tracking. Like nothing's friendly about that, but you know them really well. Same thing when like you're like trying to get ready for a debate on any topic. Like you might like study that person's work really well, so you know them.
Yeah.
Like they're inside and out.
Yeah.
But are you a close person? No, not at all.
Yeah.
If you want to be in a close personal relationship with someone, you do need to know something about their character, something about their desires, something about their goals, the kind of projects they want to bring about. But there's a next extra step here is you figure out how do you participate in that person's projects and their goals? How do you help them actually establish their hopes and dreams? So like with your children, you know, you want to help them grow and flourish, but you try to help them figure out, you know, what do you actually want to do with your life? And then you do things to participate in that and help your kids actually go achieve those goals. When I'm looking at the Gospel of John, one of the themes I see is God's goal for humanity is to enter into friendship with humans. That's a big goal. And Jesus is like, yeah, it's pretty important. Let's, you know, got a whole lot built around it that he when you go into like John 15 through 17. And if that's God's project, is he's wanting to befriend humanity, well, then now you need to make a decision. Do you want to participate in that project? Do you want to help promote God's projects? Because that's what a friend would do. Or do you want to just know God, like a lot of stuff about God? Or do you actually want to actively participate and help God, participate in God's projects and like help those things actually come to life and to fruition? So help God in this task of befriending humanity.
Yeah.
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 That's
good.
Yeah, because God knows you and he wants to know you more than just knowing facts about you. He wants this friendship. And that friendship, I think, is like what it means to be known by God is God's like, yeah, I want this friendship with you. I want to have this kind of personal relationship because it's more than just, yeah, I know everything about you.
Yeah. You made me think a few things that I don't want to stay here too long. This could open up a big can of worms. But when you were talking about like you were touching on several issues uh, relevant to the personal paradigm and intersubjective knowledge and the
Mhm.
like. Um, you didn't say this, but I think it fits with what you were talking about. This kind of intersubjective, even what philosophers or maybe cognitive scientists, I guess, call second personal knowledge
Yeah.
of no, so there's commonly first person knowledge, third person knowledge that's talked about in philosophy and different disciplines. Third person knowledge would be something like, you know, descriptions about something. First person knowledge might be something like you think of the first person perspective. I have a perspective. There's a real sense in which you um, don't occupy my perspective. There's something really deeply subjective about that
Mhm.
in the world, and deeply subjective that gets at the heart of this personal paradigm. But then there's the second personal stuff, and this. I wonder if this probably some things here to research further.
Mhm.
Uh, as you were talking about like private investigators or
Mhm.
cops who are studying criminals and the like and trying to figure things out, uh, it it made me think of remote viewing.
Oh, yeah.
Now
Okay.
this is going to sound this is going to sound off the beaten path for a moment, but I mean, when you were talking, that's what I was thinking of, because there's a sense in which there is a real like, and maybe we can still represent this to some degree, mimic it. Maybe these complex AI algorithms can mimic it to some degree when it has enough inputted information. I mean, even the algorithms of the AI are not making sense right now. I mean, at least that's what I hear from a lot of scientists. They're
Mhm.
like, this has taken on a new life. I mean, it's really weird. It almost looks like magic now,
Mhm.
or it's starting to look like magic
Yeah.
again. Um, but then you have this like, you know, when you study a person, and this is true of debates. I mean, some people who really are good at debates, it's not um, it's certainly not solely a matter of propositions or book smarts or maybe even being the more intelligent person, at least um, mathematically or scientifically intelligent person. There's some really subjective quality of like studying like everything about them to the extent that you can, to where you really almost try to get in their mind to some extent. Well, we can't get in their mind. Uh,
But
some,
what you're talking about is this kind of empathy, because it's a cognitive
Mhm.
empathy, not necessarily like the
Yeah.
affective component, but you're trying to put yourself in this person's shoes. And I think that's important to knowing someone well, but it's also important to personal relationships.
Yes.
And I kind of one of the things I suggest in this little book about a big God is that people need to try to empathize with God, which is not normally the way we we talk about it. Normally it's like, okay, well, God's this compassion, he's got empathy and mercy with me, and yeah. Well, I think what you see in the book of Hosea is wild and crazy, because God's like, hey, go marry this prostitute. And you're like, excuse me? But one of the things that's so wild about the book of Hosea is that God is saying to Hosea the prophet, this is what it's like to be me. I want you to invite you into understanding things from my perspective. That's why I'm asking you to marry a prostitute, because this is how I view Israel. They're being unfaithful to me. And it's like, ooh, okay, this is crazy. This is awful. So there's this biblical precedent of God wanting to say, I want you to empathize with me for a bit, because this is how we're going to really grow closer to each other. And so one of the things I'm trying to get people to do when they're reading through this little book about a big God is to really try to put themselves in God's shoes and go, oh my gosh, what would it be like to create a universe? What would it really take to try to befriend humanity? And so it's a part of this like constant back and forth of going, okay, I really am trying to see what I think about God. Does that actually really fit with reality and with what God is actually like. And that requires empathy going both ways.
Yes. No, that's good. Good. Yeah. All right, let's transition a little bit. In an impersonal world of algorithms, theology, and you're making this claim in Eternal in Love, the most radical claim theology can make, maybe, is that the universe is personal at its core.
Yeah.
Let's move into some practical takeaways. Living with an eternal, loving God, bringing together temporality, emotion, personhood to daily Christian life. And so you've already said some things about this. Maybe we'll say a little bit more, unpack it, and bring it around to a close. What practical difference does it make if we really believe God is living and responsive?
So it kind of goes back to that question that I mentioned from Marilyn McCord Adams. Like, is this the kind of being that cares about me? And my question is slightly different. Is this the kind of being that could care about me? Is it actually possible for God to care about me? And then after that, then I can hopefully answer the question, does God care about me? So the practicality of this is like, if God's a certain way, if he is timeless, if he's impassible and so on, then the answer is very clear. God cannot care about you. He only cares about himself. All of his love is self-love. And you see this very explicitly in like Augustine and Herman Bavinck and others. All of God's love is self-love. You're like, ooh, okay. Yeah. And I think that should change the way you view God. It should change the way you worship and pray. I think that should have a pretty dramatic impact on how you pray, if you even want to pray after that. Or as a being that actually does love you and values you because you have value. God created you because God could see if you exist, you have value. That changes the way I think you pray. I think that changes your spiritual life in lots of interesting ways. I think this has a huge impact really on your spiritual life, because it really kind of reorients what you think you're doing in your spiritual practices.
Good. Yeah. How, any further thoughts on how might this view of God help us to slow down and recover a sense of wonder?
Yeah. So earlier I talked about 2 Peter and patience and how God's temporality is connected to divine patience. I think this is very important, but it's difficult, especially for someone like me who's like, I'm just constantly like wanting to like rush and do everything all at once. And that's not possible. Like my own reflections on causation and time and everything, what they scream to me is it is logically impossible to do everything at once. Like you just can't.
Right.
And what's kind of frustrating about this is like, you know, you spend like 15 years like studying these kind of things and go, oh, well, Ecclesiastes already told me that. Like, so Ecclesiastes says like, there's a time for everything. Come on. Like there's a time to be sad. There's a time to be happy. There's a time to mourn. There's a time to dance. You know, there's a time to rest. And you're like, yeah, it was already there, because there's nothing new under the sun. But it just took me, you know, an adult life to study these things and realize, oh yeah, there is nothing new under the sun. So I can't do everything all at once. It's logically impossible. And so what that means is I'm forced to rest. How do you do that? Gosh, for me, I have to do lots of different things other than just recognizing it's logically impossible, like to do everything at once. I have to like go to the gym quite often. That helps me slow down my mind. Try to do mindfulness meditation and prayer to slow down my mind. Through counseling, I had to do... one of my counselors, we came up with this mantra that I actually say it's okay to go slow. So like sometimes I have to remind myself, yeah, it is okay to go slow. Yeah. Walking through nature, that's I think very important sometimes. And then just going dancing with my wife, you know, or just dancing with your friends. Like
that's good. That's healthy.
Yes, it's very healthy. And I think,
well, unless you're a Baptist. Right?
Unless you're a Baptist, then it's like, oh gosh, this is terrible.
Maybe you shouldn't be dancing.
Yeah. But I think when I would look at some of these statements, though, like, because we've both like applied for jobs at schools where they've got a statement about dancing and the statement of conduct, and you're like,
yeah,
I find it weird, because I think dancing is this expression, this statement to God that you are thankful for being alive. So I and for me, it's this moment where I am fully in the moment. I'm fully present and able to just kind of see around me all these valuable conscious beings that are somehow either intentionally or unintentionally doing some kind of act of worship towards God. So these are things that help me slow down and try to actually find rest in God.
Good. Yeah. If God is in time or he's entered time, perhaps the way forward isn't faster, but deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to bring this around to a close. Yeah. My guest today has been Dr. R.T. Mullins, author of Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God. We've explored what it means to think of God not as a distant or frozen imperfection, but as the living, loving, responsive creator who moves with us in time. You can find Ryan's work and podcast, The Reluctant Theologian, wherever you get your shows. They're on all the major platforms, Apple, Spotify. If today's conversation helps you slow down and see that theology still speaks to the soul in our fast world, subscribe, share, and join us again. Because in the end, it really is a theological world after all. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's been good. Really good. I'll end with this. What if our problem with time isn't just busyness, but bad theology? Dr. R.T. Mullins joins Joshua Farris to explore how divine time, emotion, and personhood can heal our hurried hearts.